Seven strangers, one secluded mountain cabin, a seductive game of truth or dare that leads shy Nya to surrender her first kiss to a mysterious billionaire in darkness. None of them realize they're pawns in a deadly experiment with roots in murder, one where desire and danger have become impossibly entangled. Hi, my very beautiful, lovely, and great family. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. I am James Peter, your temporary host, and it's truly an honor to be part of our most beautiful family. A beautiful Wednesday prayer for Mr. Peter's family. May love, happiness, and endless blessings fill your hearts today and always. Now, about today's story. This one will be even more powerful, deeply emotional, and absolutely unforgettable, but it's a little longer. I promise, once you start, you won't be able to stop. Promise me you'll watch the full story because short stories lose their beauty, and Mr. Peter never compromises on quality. Now I want to hear from you. We are one family. Comment below and let me know. Are you happy with my performance? Also, let's take attendance. Who's present? Drop your name in the comments, and let's start this story with love. Chapter 1. Strangers on a Path. Naya. Bennett tightened her grip on the worn leather journal as the shuttle climbed the winding mountain road. The vehicle crested a final turn, revealing Whispering Pines Retreat, nestled among ancient trees, their branches swaying in greeting against the cloudless Carolina sky. "Last stop, folks," the driver announced, braking at a rustic welcome center. Nia hesitated while the other passengers gathered their belongings. What had possessed her to sign up for a wilderness retreat with complete strangers? Her bookstore had survived without her for years during regular business hours. 5 consecutive days was another matter entirely. Still, her therapist's words echoed. Sometimes healing begins when we step into unfamiliar territory. She was the last to exit, squinting in the brilliant sunlight. 6 others had already gathered near a wooden signpost, maintaining the careful distance strangers keep. None made eye contact, each apparently wondering if they'd made a terrible mistake. A silver-haired woman in hiking pants and a faded blue shirt approached Naya with an outstretched hand. "I'm Amara," she said, her voice warm like honey over gravel. Deep lines around her eyes suggested years of either laughter or sorrow, perhaps both. "Naya," she replied, returning the handshake with a tentative smile. A muscular man with a permanent scowl hurled his duffel onto the ground. "Is there a guide or what? I didn't pay to stand around in a parking lot." His voice carried the sharp edge of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Patience, young man," Amara said, unruffled. "Good things come to those who wait." He muttered something under his breath and checked his watch. 2 college-aged students, a young woman with intricate braids and a lanky man with nervous hands, argued over a creased map. "This trail clearly connects to," the woman began. "Jasmine, you're holding it upside down," the man interrupted. Jasmine snatched the map. "No, I'm not, Kai. You just can't read topographical markers." Near the Welcome Center steps, an elegant woman in white linen examined her manicure, designer sunglasses perched atop her sleek bob. Everything about her seemed calculated for effect, from her impractically pristine hiking boots to the way she surveyed the group with thinly veiled disdain. Nia's gaze settled on the 6th stranger, a tall man standing apart from the others, observing the scene with quiet intensity. Unlike the others who fidgeted with phones or luggage, he stood perfectly still, comfortable in solitude. When their eyes met, Nia felt a strange jolt, as if recognizing someone she'd never met. He nodded slightly before looking away. A harried woman in a ranger uniform emerged from the center. "Welcome to Whispering Pines. I'm Ranger Talia." She clutched a clipboard, her expression apologetic. "I'm afraid there's been a change of plans. I was supposed to be your guide, but I've been called away for a search and rescue operation on the North Ridge. The scowling man threw up his hands. Perfect. Just perfect. Marcus, is it? Talia consulted her clipboard. I understand your frustration, but safety comes first in these mountains. However, the retreat will continue. She distributed detailed maps. The cabin is 4 miles along this marked trail. It's fully stocked with provisions and has detailed instructions for all planned activities. You expect us to find our way alone? The elegant woman asked, as if Talia had suggested they fly to the moon. The trail is well marked, Miss Spencer. Your group should reach the cabin well before sunset if you start within the hour. The quiet man finally spoke, his voice surprisingly gentle. We'll manage, Ranger. Thank you for the maps. Talia smiled gratefully. The emergency radio at the cabin connects directly to headquarters. Check in upon arrival, and I'll join you when I can. With a last apologetic glance, she hurried to a waiting jeep. The group stood in awkward silence until Amara clapped her hands. Well then, shall we introduce ourselves properly before we begin our adventure? Reluctantly, they formed a loose circle. Amara went first, explaining she was a retired teacher from Phoenix. Jasmine and Kai identified themselves as students from Georgia Tech, though something in their stiff postures suggested their connection was complicated. Marcus Daniels, the impatient man said, between jobs. His tone discouraged further questions. Violet Spencer, the elegant woman offered with practiced charm. I work in fashion. Her smile never reached her eyes. When the circle reached the quiet man, he seemed to choose his words carefully. Zion Rivers. I work with numbers. Something in his deliberate vagueness made Naya wonder what he wasn't saying. Finally, all eyes turned to her. Naya swallowed, discomfort crawling up her spine. I'm Naya Bennett. I own a small bookstore in Charleston. The words felt inadequate, but offering more felt like stripping away protective layers she wasn't ready to shed. They shouldered their packs and began the ascent. Nie deliberately hung back, preferring to walk alone with her thoughts. To her surprise, Zion slowed his pace until they fell into step beside each other. What kind of books do you sell? He asked. All kinds, mostly classics and contemporary fiction, some poetry. She studied him from the corner of her eye. Do you read much? A smile softened his features. Every chance I get, though lately those chances are rare. What do you like to read? Stories that remind me people are complex, that appearances rarely tell the whole truth. Before she could respond, the trail narrowed, forcing the group into single file. As they climbed higher, Nia found herself focusing on Zion's broad shoulders ahead of her, wondering about the weight they seemed to carry, a weight that had nothing to do with his backpack. The afternoon sun filtered through pine boughs, casting dappled shadows across the path. For the first time in months, Nia felt the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen. Whatever awaited at the cabin, for this moment, she was exactly where she needed to be, moving forward, one uncertain step at a time, in the company of 6 strangers who carried their own unspoken stories. What none of them yet realized was how completely their lives would intertwine over the next 5 days, or how the truths they kept hidden would inevitably come to light in ways none could anticipate. Chapter 2. First Night Tensions. Golden hour painted the mountains as the 7 hikers crested the final ridge. Below them, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, stood their destination, a rustic 2-story cabin with a wraparound porch and chimney already puffing wood smoke into the twilight sky. Thank God, Violet murmured, leaning against a tree to massage her ankle. Her pristine hiking boots had left angry red welts where fashion had triumphed over function. Marcus checked his watch. 4 hours for a simple hike. This trip is already a disaster. The view was worth every step, Amara countered, her face tilted toward the setting sun. The warmth bathed her silver hair in amber light, making her appear almost ethereal. Nia lingered behind as the others descended toward the cabin. She'd been quiet during the trek, observing the subtle dynamics emerging between her companions. Jasmine and Kai walked together, yet maintained a careful distance, their conversation oscillating between forced politeness and tense silence. Marcus charged ahead at every opportunity, as if the journey itself were an inconvenience rather than the point. Violet alternated between complaints and carefully staged photos of herself against scenic backdrops. Only Zion and Amara seemed genuinely present, pausing occasionally to identify birds or interesting plants. Several times, Naya caught Zion watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity mixed with something deeper. Taking it all in. His voice startled her from her thoughts. He doubled back without her noticing. "It's beautiful," she said simply, gesturing toward the panorama of ridges fading into blue-shadowed valleys. "Some views deserve to be savored." His eyes held hers for a beat longer than necessary, and Nia felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the hike. Inside the cabin, territorial negotiations had already begun. Marcus stood at the center of the main room, arms crossed. "There are 4 bedrooms, 3 have twin beds, 1 has a queen. How are we dividing this up?" "Kai and I can share," Jasmine began, then stopped herself. "I mean, we're used to dorm living. We don't mind twins." An awkward silence followed her hasty correction. Naya noted the flash of hurt in Kai's eyes before he masked it with nonchalance. Violet examined the queen bedroom with obvious approval. "I require proper sleep for medical reasons. The queen is best for my condition." "What condition is that?" Marcus challenged. "Terminal entitlement." Before Violet could retort, Amara intervened. "I'm perfectly comfortable in a twin. At my age, you learn to sleep anywhere." Her gentle authority diffused the tension. "Perhaps we should focus on dinner before darkness falls completely." The kitchen revealed a well-stocked pantry and refrigerator. Naya gravitated toward the familiar task of meal preparation, finding solace in the rhythmic chopping of vegetables. Without planning it, Zion joined her, washing produce and heating olive oil in a cast-iron pan. "You cook?" she asked. "I live alone," he replied. "It was either learn or subsist on takeout." They worked in companionable silence, their movements synchronizing naturally as if they'd cooked together for years. Nya noticed his hands, strong but deft, with a thin scar across the right knuckles. Working hands, not what she'd expect from someone who worked with numbers. The aroma of sautéed garlic and herbs drew the others to the kitchen. Soon the rough-hewn dining table was laden with a simple feast: pasta with roasted vegetables, garden salad, and fresh bread discovered in the pantry. "This is impressive," Jasmine said, twirling pasta around her fork. "Naya deserves the credit," Zion replied. Naya shook her head. "It was a team effort." "So," Marcus said between bites, "why is everyone really here?" "These retreats aren't cheap." Amara smiled enigmatically. "Sometimes we need to step away from our lives to see them clearly." "I'm researching wilderness programs for an article," Violet offered smoothly. "The outdoor wellness industry is booming." "We're taking a break from finals," Kai said, not meeting Jasmine's eyes. "Change of scenery." When the circle reached Zion, he considered his words carefully. "I needed space from expectations." "What about you, Nia?" Jasmine asked. All eyes turned toward her, and Nia felt the familiar tightness in her chest whenever attention focused on her. "My grandmother passed away recently," she said quietly. "She raised me. The bookstore was hers originally." "I'm sorry for your loss," Amara said gently. Nya nodded. unable to add that since Gran's death, the empty apartment above the bookstore echoed with memories, that sometimes she went days speaking only to customers, that signing up for this retreat had been an act of desperate courage. After dinner, as they cleared dishes, the first heavy raindrops pelted the roof. Within minutes, a torrential downpour enveloped the cabin, lightning illuminating the room in blue-white flashes, followed by booming thunder. "Perfect timing," Zion remarked. Violet glanced at her phone. No signal. Wonderful. "The ranger mentioned an emergency radio," Kai said. Marcus located the device on a shelf and attempted to make a contact. Static answered. "We're cut off." "Don't be dramatic," Amara chided. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be, with shelter, food, and company." Nia stepped onto the covered porch, watching sheets of rain transform the clearing into a shallow lake. The storm's intensity matched the turbulence she'd carried inside for months, violent yet somehow cleansing. She sensed, rather than heard, Zion join her. He leaned against the railing beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "Do storms frighten you?" he asked. "Number. They remind me that nature doesn't care about our plans or pretenses. There's honesty in that." He nodded thoughtfully. "Most people spend their lives avoiding forces they can't control." "And you?" Lightning illuminated his profile. Strong jaw, straight nose, eyes reflecting the elemental display before them. "I've built walls against unpredictability, but walls keep things out and in." Before Naya could respond, a sharp crack followed by a tremendous crash shook the ground. Through the curtain of rain, they watched an ancient pine topple across the trail they'd hiked hours earlier. "Mother Nature has ensured we're staying put," Zion observed. Something in his tone made Nia turn toward him. "Does that bother you?" His eyes met hers, and in them she glimpsed vulnerability at odds with his composed exterior. "No," he said softly. "For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I want to be." Inside, someone had discovered a cabinet of board games. Laughter mixed with the storm's percussion as Jasmine dealt playing cards. The warmth and light framed in the window formed a tableau of forced intimacy. 7 strangers pretending this isolation was precisely what they'd each signed up for. As Naya followed Zion back inside, Violet observed their entrance with calculating eyes. The elegant woman touched a pendant at her throat, her expression unreadable as she assessed their slightly damp clothes and the careful distance they maintained. None of them could have predicted how the storm outside would pale in comparison to the tempest building within the cabin's walls, or how a simple game suggested the following evening would change the trajectory of their lives forever. Chapter 3. The Game Begins Morning arrived with relentless rain that transformed the cabin windows into cascading waterfalls. The planned hike to Eagle's Crest was clearly impossible, leaving 7 increasingly restless strangers confined together in close quarters. Nya curled in the window seat of the common room, a dog-eared copy of Marquez open in her lap. She'd barely read 3 pages in an hour, distracted by the cabin's shifting dynamics. Amara and Marcus played chess by the fireplace, their concentration belying the tension in their postures. Kai strummed gentle melodies on a guitar found in a closet, while Jasmine pretended to ignore him from behind a magazine. Violet alternated between typing furiously on her laptop and staring out the window with barely concealed frustration. Only Zion seemed at peace with their confinement. He'd fashioned a makeshift desk from a stool and crate, where he worked steadily through a leather-bound journal, his handwriting flowing across the pages in elegant, measured strokes. Occasionally their eyes would meet across the room, and Naya would quickly return to her book, her heart performing a strange little dance she hadn't felt since high school. "I'm going to lose my mind if we don't do something," Jasmine announced, tossing aside her magazine. "We've been here 24 hours and barely know each other's last names." "That's by design," Marcus replied without looking up from the chessboard. People overshare enough in normal life. Jasmine ignored him. I propose a game, something to break the ice. Kai stopped strumming. What did you have in mind? A mischievous smile curved Jasmine's lips. Truth or dare? What are we, 16? Violet scoffed, but Naya noticed how she closed her laptop, interest piqued despite her protest. Age is irrelevant to honest connection, Amara said, moving her bishop decisively. Checkmate, by the way. Marcus stared at the board in disbelief. That's not... He rechecked possible moves and sighed. Fine. I suppose a game is better than watching rain. Nia's stomach tightened. She'd spent a lifetime avoiding the spotlight, preferring to observe rather than participate. Gran had gently called her "my little ghost" for her ability to move through spaces unnoticed. The thought of purposely inviting scrutiny made her palms damp. I should check on dinner, she murmured, rising from her seat. It's only 3 o'clock, Zion pointed out gently, his eyes understanding. The stew needs another hour at least. Trapped, Naya reluctantly joined the circle forming around the coffee table. Jasmine produced an empty wine bottle with a flourish. Traditional rules. Bottle spins, pointer asks, truth or dare. Recipient chooses, then takes their turn spinning. Let's keep it civil, Amara suggested. These walls are too thin for enemies. Where's the fun in that? Jasmine winked but nodded agreement. The first few rounds remained innocuous. Kai admitted his irrational fear of elevators. Marcus reluctantly performed a surprisingly skilled moonwalk. Violet revealed she'd once dated a minor European royal. Amara confessed to hitchhiking across Europe in her 20s with nothing but a backpack and $5. With each revelation, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Laughter came more freely, postures relaxed, and the space between them seemed less vast, all except for Nia, who grew increasingly tense as the bottle continued to spare her, until it didn't. The green glass spun in lazy circles before stopping decisively, its neck pointing directly at her. She looked up to find Zion watching her, his expression impossible to read. Truth or dare? He asked quietly. Nia's throat went dry. The safe choice was obvious, reveal some benign fact and move on. Yet something in Zion's steady gaze made her wonder what dare he might propose, what moment he might create between them. Truth, she whispered, cursing her cowardice even as the word left her lips. Zion considered her thoughtfully. What's something you've never told anyone? Something true about yourself that no one knows? The room fell silent. It wasn't a casual question. It asked for genuine vulnerability. Naya stared at her hands, considering deflection, but found herself speaking before she'd decided to. I've never been kissed. The admission hung in the air. Not a real kiss. I'm 26 years old, and I've never experienced that fundamental human connection. She forced herself to look up, expecting pity or awkward discomfort. Instead, she found 6 faces reflecting variations of gentle surprise. Never, Jasmine asked softly. Nia shook her head. After my parents' divorce, Gran raised me. The bookstore became my world. I watched other girls chase romance while I chased stories on pages. Then Gran got sick, and I became her caretaker. By the time she passed, I'd built walls so thick I'm not sure anyone could scale them if they tried. She twisted a silver ring on her finger. Sometimes I wonder if I've missed something essential about being human. The vulnerability in the room was palpable. No one spoke until Zion broke the silence. There's grace in waiting for what matters, he said. In a world of impulsive connections, patience isn't a flaw. Their eyes locked and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred careful souls. The moment broke when Violet cleared her throat. Your spin, bookshop girl. The bottle landed on Marcus, who chose dare with predictable bravado. Nothing involving the rain, he stipulated. Nya surprised herself with sudden inspiration. I dare you to allow each person here to pick one song from your phone playlist, no matter how embarrassing you find it, and you have to dance to a 30-second clip of each. Marcus's eyes widened. That's 6 songs. Cold feet, numbers guy, Kai teased. What followed transformed the cabin's atmosphere entirely. Marcus's phone revealed an unexpected passion for 80s power ballads and K-pop that had everyone doubled over with laughter. Even Marcus couldn't maintain his stoic facade by the 4th song, surrendering to increasingly theatrical performances that ended with him using the fireplace poker as a microphone stand. As darkness fell outside, the game intensified. Dares grew bolder. Kai stood in the rain reciting Shakespeare. Violet allowed Jasmine to completely restyle her perfectly coiffed hair. Amara demonstrated yoga poses that belied her 70 years. Truths delved deeper. Jasmine tearfully admitted the eating disorder she'd hidden for years. Kai confessed he'd sabotaged a rival's art project in college, an act that still haunted him. Violet revealed that beneath her glamorous facade, she struggled with crippling imposter syndrome. When the bottle pointed to Zion, who had thus far chosen only truth, Jasmine's eyes gleamed with mischief. Truth or dare, mysterious numbers, man. Something shifted in Zion's expression. A decision made. Dare. Jasmine glanced at Naya before answering. I dare you to spend 15 minutes in the storage room with the person of your choice. The implications hung heavy in the air. Zion didn't hesitate. Naya, he said simply, his voice steady despite the sudden intensity of his gaze. Naya's heart thundered so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. She stood on unsteady legs, feeling 6 pairs of eyes follow as Zion led her toward the small storage room off the kitchen. The door closed behind them with a soft click, plunging them into darkness relieved only by thin strips of light through the gaps in the wooden door. The small space was crowded with supplies, leaving barely enough room for 2 people to stand without touching. We don't have to, Zion began. Why did you choose me? Nia interrupted, grateful the darkness hid her flushed cheeks. She felt, rather than saw him move closer, his breath warming the space between them. Because since the moment I saw you on that mountain path, I haven't been able to think clearly. You don't know me, she whispered. I know enough. His hand found hers in the darkness. You see the world through stories. You listen more than you speak. You care for others before yourself. You're afraid of needing people because everyone you've needed has left. Nie trembled. How could you possibly? Because I recognize myself in you. His thumb brushed gently across her knuckles. We're both hiding, Naya. Different secrets, same fear. The confession hung between them, more intimate than any physical touch. Naya felt tears prick her eyes at being truly seen for perhaps the first time in her adult life. Naya, Zion whispered, suddenly closer. May I kiss you? The question, so simple, so profound in its respect, undid her completely. 26 years of waiting distilled into a single whispered word, yes. His lips found hers in the darkness, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. The kiss was gentle yet insistent, as if he'd been waiting a lifetime to discover the precise softness of her mouth. Naya's hands moved instinctively to her shoulders, steadying herself against the sudden lightheadedness that threatened to overwhelm her. She had read 1,000 descriptions of first kisses in her beloved books, but none had captured this. The way time seemed simultaneously suspended and accelerated, how the world narrowed to the points where their bodies connected, the soft sound that escaped her throat unbidden. When they finally separated, both breathing unevenly, Naya kept her eyes closed, memorizing the sensation. Worth waiting for, Zion asked softly, vulnerability evident in his question. Naya answered by finding his lips again in the darkness, her natural reticence momentarily forgotten as she poured 26 years of unspoken longing into a kiss that left them both breathless. Outside the storage room, the game continued, voices and laughter muffled by the wooden door. But inside this small, fragrant space, crowded with practical supplies, something impractical and beautiful had begun, something neither Nie nor Zion could have anticipated when they'd packed their bags for a simple wilderness retreat. Neither suspected that in precisely 43 hours, the truths still hidden between them would threaten to destroy this delicate beginning, almost before it had a chance to bloom. Chapter 4. Unexpected Revelations. Dawn arrived with unexpected clarity, the storm having exhausted itself overnight. Sunlight streamed through dew-dropped windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny constellations in the morning light. The cabin creaked and settled, its wooden bones warming after the chill of rain. Nya woke before anyone else, her mind replaying the previous night's events with cinematic precision. The storage room, the darkness, Zion's gentle question, the kiss that had shifted something fundamental within her. They had emerged from their 15 minutes to knowing smirks and raised eyebrows, but no one had pressed for details, perhaps sensing the fragile newness of what had transpired. Now, in the sobering light of morning, uncertainty crept in. Had she imagined the connection between them? Was it merely the artificial intimacy created by isolation and the emotionally charged game? She slipped quietly from her room, feet silent on the wooden floors. In the kitchen, she busied herself making coffee, finding comfort in the familiar ritual. The first sip scalded her tongue, the pain a welcome distraction from her thoughts. "You're up early?" Nia startled, nearly spilling her coffee. Amara stood in the doorway, silver hair loose around her shoulders, making her appear younger somehow. "I'm used to opening the bookstore at dawn," Naya explained, offering a mug to the older woman. Amara accepted with a grateful nod. They stood in companionable silence, watching morning mist rise from the forest floor through the kitchen window. "Last night was illuminating," Amara finally said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Nia focused intently on her coffee. "The game, you mean? Games have a way of revealing truths we hide even from ourselves." Amara's weathered hand covered Nia's briefly. "When you reach my age, you recognize something rare the moment it appears. Don't let fear blind you." Before Nia could respond, footsteps on the stairs ended their conversation. Voices gradually filled the cabin as everyone emerged, drawn by the aroma of coffee and the promise of clear skies. Zion was the last to appear, his hair damp from a shower, wearing a simple gray Henley that somehow made his eyes appear more intensely blue. When he spotted Nia, a smile transformed his features, erasing any doubt she might have harbored about the previous night. "Good morning," he said softly, accepting the coffee she offered. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending an absurd flutter through her chest. "Morning," she replied, aware of Violet observing their interaction with calculated interest. After breakfast, with the rain finally cleared, the group scattered to explore. Kai and Jasmine headed to a nearby waterfall, their earlier tensions seemingly eased. Marcus announced his intention to hike to the ridge for cell reception. Violet claimed she needed quiet time to work on her article. "Would you like to join me?" Zion asked Nia when they found themselves alone in the kitchen. "I noticed a lake on the map, about 20 minutes east." They walked in companionable silence, the forest around them vibrant with post-rain renewal. Drops fell from overhead branches, occasionally landing on Naya's shoulders or catching in her hair like tiny diamonds. Zion noticed one such drop and, after a moment's hesitation, gently brushed it away, his fingers lingering against her temple. The lake emerged suddenly through the trees, its surface a perfect mirror reflecting azure sky and emerald pines. They found a sun-warmed rock jutting into the water and settled side by side, close but not touching, each acutely aware of the other's presence. "About last night," Zion began. "It's okay," Nia interrupted, suddenly afraid of what he might say. "It was just a game." "Was it?" His gaze held hers steadily. "Because it didn't feel like a game to me." Nia looked away, watching a dragonfly skim the water's surface. "I don't know what it was," she admitted. "I don't have the experience to categorize these things." "Neither do I." When she glanced at him skeptically, he elaborated. "I've had relationships, yes, but nothing that felt authentic. Nothing that wasn't colored by external factors." "What factors?" Zion hesitated, and Naya sensed him carefully choosing his words. "My work creates certain expectations. It's difficult to know if someone is interested in me or what I represent." "What exactly do you do?" Naya asked, the question that had lingered since his vague introduction. Again, that careful hesitation. "Financial analysis, primarily. Investment strategy." It wasn't a lie, precisely, but Naya sensed it wasn't the complete truth either. Before she could press further, Zion changed the subject. "Tell me about your bookstore." The request was so genuine that Naya found herself describing her beloved shop in detail. The creaking floorboards, the carefully curated sections, the reading nook where children gathered for weekly story time, the apartment above where she'd grown up under Gran's care. "You love it," Zion observed, "but it also traps you." The insight startled her. "How did you—" "Your voice changes when you talk about the obligations versus the joy of it." His expression grew distant. "I understand that particular conflict intimately." Their conversation flowed with surprising ease after that. They discovered shared passions for astronomy, classic films, and blueberry pancakes. They debated the merits of various literary endings and found common ground in believing that ambiguity often served a story better than neat resolution. Time slipped away unnoticed until Zion suddenly pointed toward the water. "Look." A family of otters had emerged, sleek bodies gliding through the lake with playful grace. Nia and Zion watched, entranced, as the creatures performed an elaborate water ballet, seemingly unmindful of their human audience. "I've never seen anything like it," Nia whispered. "Nor have I," Zion replied, though he was no longer watching the otters. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken potential. Slowly, deliberately, Zion leaned toward her. Unlike the darkness of the storage room, here in clear daylight, Naya could see every nuance of his expression. The slight uncertainty in his eyes, the determined set of his jaw, the softness around his mouth. Their lips had barely touched when a shout echoed across the lake, shattering the moment. "Help! We need help!" They jumped to their feet to see Marcus on the opposite shore, waving frantically. Without hesitation, they raced around the lake's perimeter, arriving breathless to find Marcus supporting a grimacing Kai, who couldn't put weight on his right ankle. "Slipped on the trail," Kai explained through gritted teeth. "Pretty sure it's just sprained." Together, they fashioned a makeshift crutch from a sturdy branch and helped Kai back to the cabin. Jasmine hovered anxiously, her earlier composure replaced by genuine concern that suggested their complicated history included real affection. "I found something while searching for cell reception," Marcus announced, once Kai was settled with ice on his elevated ankle. "Something you all should see." From his backpack, he withdrew several yellowed newspaper clippings protected in plastic sleeves. These were hidden inside a trail guide in the bookshelf. The group gathered around as Marcus spread the clippings on the coffee table. Headlines from the local paper detailed the tragic death of a hiker at Whispering Pines 15 years earlier, a young woman who had fallen from a cliff during a corporate retreat. Photos showed search parties combing the same forests they'd walked through. The final article reported inconclusive findings, accident or suicide, the authorities couldn't determine. That's morbid, Violet said, though she studied the clippings with undisguised interest. Why would someone keep these? The guide's note said something about respecting the land's history, Marcus replied. Apparently, this incident led to the retreat center closing for several years. The poor woman, Amara murmured, touching a faded photo. Gabriela Suarez, only 28. Nya felt a chill despite the cabin's warmth. Why show us this? Marcus shrugged. Thought it was relevant information about where we're staying. Plus, I found something else. He pointed to a quote from the retreat center's then-owner. This tragedy has shown us that wilderness experiences must be properly supervised. We cannot afford to let participants navigate physical or emotional challenges without professional guidance. Yet here we are, Jasmine observed, with no guide. Exactly, Marcus said. Doesn't that strike anyone else as odd? A retreat center with a history of tragedy suddenly sends 7 strangers into the wilderness alone. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Nia noticed Amara studying her fingernails with unusual intensity, as if avoiding the conversation entirely. I think we're making too much of this, Zion finally said. The ranger was called away for an emergency. It happens. Does it? Marcus challenged. Because I hiked all the way to the ridge for cell reception. Called the ranger station directly. They have no record of a Ranger Talia, nor any search and rescue operation on the North Ridge yesterday. The revelation landed like a stone in still water, ripples of unease spreading through the room. Nia caught Zion's eye, seeing her own confusion reflected there. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding, Amara suggested mildly. Or perhaps, Violet interjected, her journalistic instincts evidently activated, there's more to this retreat than a simple wilderness experience. The conversation might have continued, but a sudden sharp knock on the cabin door silenced everyone. They exchanged uncertain glances. They were miles from the nearest road, isolated by terrain and the washed-out bridge. Who could that be? Jasmine whispered. Zion moved to the door, opening it cautiously to reveal a rain-soaked figure in a dark jacket, face obscured by a dripping hood. "Thank goodness," a feminine voice exclaimed. "I thought I'd never find this place in the storm." The hood came down to reveal a striking woman with copper hair and piercing green eyes. "I'm Echo. I'm supposed to be part of your retreat group. But my car broke down yesterday and I had to hike the entire way." She stepped inside, surveying the stunned faces with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I hope I haven't missed anything important." Naya didn't miss the flicker of recognition that passed over Zion's face before he carefully composed his features into a neutral expression. The newcomer noticed, too, her smile faltering momentarily before returning with renewed brilliance. "Zion," Echo said softly. "What an unexpected surprise." The simple greeting carried undercurrents that filled the room like smoke, invisible but suffocating. Naya felt something cold settle in her stomach as Zion replied with careful formality. "Echo, it's been a long time." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted perceptibly as the 7th stranger removed her wet jacket, her calculating gaze moving from person to person before returning to Zion with unmistakable familiarity. Whatever tenuous connections had formed over the past 2 days now seemed threatened by this new arrival and the history she clearly shared with the man who, just an hour earlier, had almost kissed Naya by the lake. The newspaper clippings about tragedy at Whispering Pines lay forgotten on the table as a new tension filled the cabin, one that suggested the real dangers might not lie on treacherous mountain paths, but in the secrets and connections the 8 people now sharing this isolated space had yet to reveal. Chapter 5. Daring Steps. Echo's arrival cast a shadow over the cabin that lingered well into evening. She integrated herself with practiced charm, explaining she was a wilderness photographer documenting retreats across the country. Her equipment, she claimed, would arrive with Ranger Talia's return. The explanation satisfied everyone except Nia, who couldn't ignore the silent current flowing between Echo and Zion, a history written in averted gazes and careful distance. Dinner was an exercise in forced conviviality. Kai, ankle elevated on a cushioned ottoman, entertained the group with exaggerated stories of college misadventures. Jasmine laughed too loudly at his jokes, her eyes constantly darting to Echo, who had positioned herself directly across from Zion. Amara observed everyone with quiet intensity, occasionally catching Naya's eye with significant looks that suggested she found the situation as intriguing as it was concerning. Only Marcus seemed genuinely relaxed, having apparently forgotten his earlier suspicions about the retreat in favor of explaining cryptocurrency trends to an increasingly glazed-looking Violet. For her part, Violet divided her attention between Marcus's monologue and subtle observation of the triangle forming between Echo, Zion, and Naya. Throughout the meal, Echo dropped casually devastating remarks. "This reminds me of that restaurant in Singapore, Zion. Remember the chef who prepared mango sticky rice tableside? Or, you still take your coffee black with 1 sugar, I assume?" Some habits never change. Each reference landed like a precise dart, making it abundantly clear that Echo knew Zion intimately. Far more intimately than someone who had shared a mere 15 minutes in a storage room with him. Naya felt increasingly foolish for believing she'd experienced something special the previous night. How could a single kiss compete with what was evidently a significant relationship? Zion attempted several times to speak privately with Naya, but circumstances, or perhaps Echo's careful orchestration, prevented any moment alone. When cleanup was complete and the evening stretched before them with awkward potential, Echo produced a bottle of expensive bourbon from her backpack. "I think we should continue last night's game," she suggested with a predatory smile. "I've heard so much about it. Truth or dare, was it? Perfect for new connections and old secrets." The emphasis on old secrets wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Zion, whose jaw tightened visibly. "I don't think," he began, but Jasmine was already arranging the seating in a circle, eyes bright with anticipation of drama. "Excellent idea," she declared. "Echo should experience the full retreat program." Nia considered excusing herself but was trapped when Amara patted the space beside her on the sofa. "Join us, dear. Sometimes observation is more revealing than participation." The game began with superficial questions and silly dares, familiar territory that nonetheless carried new tension with Echo's inclusion. When the bottle landed on Zion, Echo leaned forward eagerly. "Truth or dare, stranger?" Her emphasis on the last word carried unmistakable irony. Zion's eyes flickered briefly to Naya before answering. "Truth." Echo's smile was all teeth. "Tell us about your most significant relationship failure and why it ended." A collective intake of breath circled the room. The question overstepped boundaries established in previous rounds, targeting something personally painful rather than entertainingly revealing. Zion's expression remained carefully neutral. "Pass." "You can't pass," Echo challenged. "Those are the rules." "Then I change to dare." Echo's laugh held no warmth. "Fine. I dare you to tell the truth about why you disappeared from my life 2 years ago, without explanation." Tension crackled through the room. Whatever history existed between them clearly remained unresolved, at least for Echo. Naya studied her hands, wishing herself anywhere but witness to this public dissection of Zion's past. "That's not how the game works," Marcus interjected, unexpectedly coming to Zion's defense. "A dare can't just be a repackaged truth." "Agreed," Amara said firmly. "Echo, if you have personal matters to discuss, Perhaps a private conversation would be more appropriate. Echo maintained her smile, though it hardened at the edges. Of course. My mistake. She considered briefly. New dare. I dare you to kiss the person in this room you're most attracted to. Properly. None of that storage room secrecy. The challenge hung in the air, its implications obvious. Every eye moved between Zion, Echo, and Nia in a silent triangle of anticipation. Nia felt heat rise in her cheeks, equal parts hope and mortification. Without hesitation, Zion rose from his seat and crossed to Nia. The room fell silent as he knelt before her, his eyes seeking permission rather than assuming it. When she gave a nearly imperceptible nod, he gently cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with deliberate tenderness. Not a performative display for their audience, but a genuine expression of preference that left no doubt about his choice. When they separated, Nia glimpsed fury flash across Echo's features before it disappeared behind practiced poise. Zion returned to his seat without looking at his former flame, his quiet dignity in stark contrast to the charged atmosphere. Well, Violet drawled into the silence, that certainly clarifies things. The bottle spun again, landing on Nia. All eyes turned to her, including Echo's narrowed gaze. Truth or dare? Echo asked, voice honey-sweet with underlying venom. Nia knew truth would invite questions about Zion she wasn't prepared to answer. Dare, she said, surprising herself with her steadiness. Echo considered her for a long moment. I dare you to spend 15 minutes alone in the cabin's cellar, in complete darkness. There's a cellar? Kai asked. I discovered it earlier, Echo replied. The entrance is hidden behind the pantry shelves, quite the spooky space, perfect for confronting fears. Nia felt cold dread settle in her stomach. Since childhood, darkness had been her most profound fear, not the gentle dimness of twilight, but the absolute absence of light where imagination conjured horrors in every corner. Gran had installed night lights throughout their apartment after finding 8-year-old Nia hyperventilating in a power outage. You don't have to, Zion said quietly, clearly registering her distress. But backing down seemed impossible under Echo's triumphant scrutiny. I'll do it, Nia agreed, her voice only slightly betraying her terror. Echo led them to the pantry, where she demonstrated how a particular shelf swung outward to reveal rough-hewn stairs descending into blackness. A musty odor rose from below, carrying decades of damp and disuse. 15 minutes, Echo reminded her with false sweetness. We'll be timing. Nia took a deep breath and began her descent, each step sending shivers of anxiety through her body. The wooden stairs creaked ominously beneath her weight. At the bottom, she turned to see 7 silhouettes framed in the doorway above. Remember, complete darkness, Echo called down. No phone light allowed. Before Nia could protest, the door swung shut with dreadful finality, plunging her into suffocating blackness. She heard the distant click of a lock engaging, followed by fading footsteps. Panic clawed instantly at her throat. The darkness pressed against her skin like a living entity, and her lungs struggled to draw sufficient oxygen. She stretched her hands out blindly, desperate for any tactile anchor to reality. Her fingers connected with rough stone walls, cool and slightly damp. Breathe, she whispered to herself. Just breathe. She forced herself to count each inhalation, focusing on the rhythm rather than the oppressive darkness. Gradually, her racing heartbeat slowed. As her eyes adjusted, she realized the darkness wasn't absolute. Faint slivers of light penetrated through cracks in the floorboards above, creating a strange constellation effect against the cellar's low ceiling. Moving carefully in the near blackness, Nia explored her surroundings. The cellar was smaller than she'd initially feared, perhaps 15 feet square. Old shelving lined one wall, holding dusty mason jars and forgotten supplies. A workbench occupied another wall, its surface crowded with unidentifiable shapes. Her foot connected with something solid that skittered across the floor with a metallic sound. Crouching carefully, she found a flashlight, ancient and likely non-functional, but she tried the switch anyway. To her astonishment, a weak yellow beam cut through the darkness. "Thank you," she breathed to whatever benevolent force had placed this miracle in her path. The modest light transformed her terror into cautious curiosity. She swept the beam across the cellar, revealing its secrets: canned preserves with faded labels, coils of rope, stacked firewood, rusty tools hanging from nails. It was merely a storage space, not the chamber of horrors her imagination had conjured. The flashlight beam caught something unexpected: a wooden chest tucked beneath the workbench. Curiosity overcoming caution, Naya crouched to examine it. The unlocked latch opened easily, revealing a collection of leather-bound journals. She lifted the topmost volume, opening to a random page covered in elegant handwriting. October 12th, 2008. The seventh retreat concluded today. Another success, though participant, Dee nearly discovered the observation room. Must be more careful with placement of monitoring equipment. Monitoring equipment. Observation room. Nia flipped through more pages, finding detailed notes about participants and their interactions, psychological assessments, and repeated references to the experiment. A chill that had nothing to do with the cellar's temperature ran through her. Footsteps overhead interrupted her discovery. Quickly, she returned the journal and closed the chest, positioning it exactly as she'd found it. She switched off the flashlight and slipped it into her pocket, just as the cellar door creaked open. "Time's up," Jasmine called down. "You survived." Naya climbed the stairs on unsteady legs, blinking against the sudden brightness of the kitchen. The group awaited with varying expressions: concern from Zion, satisfaction from Echo, curiosity from the others. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Marcus observed. Nia forced a smile. "Just glad to be back in the light." "Seems you conquered your fear," Echo noted, sounding almost disappointed. "Sometimes what we fear most turns out to be illuminating," Nia replied, the double meaning clear only to herself. She caught Amara watching her with unusual intensity, as if trying to read something behind her careful composure. The game continued, but Naya's mind remained in the cellar with those mysterious journals. What kind of retreat were they really participating in? Who was recording their interactions, and for what purpose? When the bottle eventually landed on Violet, Echo's dare sent her and Marcus to the storage room for their own 15 minutes. As conversation fragmented into smaller groups during their absence, Zion finally managed to speak privately with Naya by the fireplace. "Are you okay?" he asked, genuine concern warming his voice. That was cruel of Echo. She knew somehow about your fear of darkness. "I'm fine," Naya assured him, though fine hardly encompassed the tumult of her thoughts. She debated whether to share her discovery, but hesitated. Without knowing who might be involved in whatever experiment the journals documented, caution seemed prudent. Instead, she asked the question that had burned since Echo's arrival. "Who is she to you?" Zion's expression tightened. "Someone from my past. We were together for nearly 2 years. She clearly believes there are unresolved issues between you." Echo believes many things that aren't necessarily true. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of discomfort. "Our relationship ended because it was built on false pretenses. She wanted, still wants, things I can't give her." "What things?" Naya pressed, needing to understand the dynamic that had transformed the cabin's atmosphere. Zion hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Echo is attracted to what she believes I represent, not who I actually am. When she realized the gap between her perception and reality, she tried to reshape me rather than adjust her expectations." Before Naya could respond, a commotion from the kitchen interrupted them. They hurried to find Jasmine standing frozen by the pantry, her face pale. "The cellar door won't open," she explained, voice tight with concern. "And I hear something inside. Like movement." "Violet and Marcus are still in the storage room," Kai said, balancing on his makeshift crutch. "Everyone else is accounted for." A chill ran through the group as they realized the implication. Someone, or something, was in the cellar. Someone who hadn't entered through the pantry. Zion and Kai moved the shelf that concealed the entrance, revealing the sturdy door now firmly shut. Zion knocked firmly. "Hello? Is someone down there?" Silence answered. "Maybe it was the building settling," Amara suggested, though her usual confidence seemed diminished. Zion tried the handle. As Jasmine had said, it didn't budge. "It's locked from the inside," he concluded. "That's impossible," Echo insisted. "The lock only works from this side." As they debated, Naya recalled something from her exploration. A second set of shelves on the far wall of the cellar that had seemed oddly positioned. Had they concealed another entrance? And if so, who had access to it? A sudden bang against the door made everyone jump. Then another, more forceful. "Step back," Zion instructed, positioning himself protectively before the group. The door burst open, revealing not an intruder, but Ranger Talia, looking considerably less professional than during their first meeting. Her hair hung in damp tangles, her uniform was mud-streaked, and her eyes held a wild, disoriented look. "You're all in danger," she gasped, clutching the doorframe for support. "You need to leave. Now." "What are you talking about?" Marcus demanded, having returned with Violet at the commotion. "What's going on?" "There's no time to explain," Talia insisted. "Pack only essentials. I'll lead you down the emergency trail." "We're not going anywhere until you explain," Zion stated firmly, his calm authority creating a center in the chaos. Talia looked over her shoulder as if expecting pursuit. "This isn't a regular retreat. You're part of a psychological experiment, one that's gone very, very wrong." "Wrong how?" Nia asked, thinking of the journals hidden below. "The woman who died here 15 years ago, Gabriela Suarez?" Talia's voice shook. "Her death wasn't an accident or suicide, and the person responsible has returned to recreate the circumstances, with you as the new subjects." Shocked silence fell over the group. Echo was the first to recover, her voice skeptical. "That's absurd. Who would do such a thing?" Talia's eyes moved from face to face, lingering on each person. "One of you," she said quietly. "One of you isn't who they claim to be." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas, instantly transforming their tenuous connections into webs of suspicion. 7 strangers looked at each other with new wariness, each wondering which among them harbored deadly secrets. And in that moment of fracturing trust, the lights throughout the cabin flickered once, twice, and died, plunging them into absolute darkness, broken only by distant thunder announcing the return of the storm. Chapter 6. Waterfall Whispers. The generator hummed to life after Talia's dramatic revelation, restoring light but not calm to the cabin. The Rangers' claims had shattered their fragile trust, leaving only suspicion. Despite demands for details, Talia wouldn't name her suspect, insisting they evacuate immediately. When Marcus pointed out that hiking treacherous trails in darkness during a storm would be dangerous, even she conceded they should wait until morning. "We stay in pairs," Zion declared, a natural authority in his voice that no one challenged. "No one goes anywhere alone until we're safely out of these mountains." Echo positioned herself subtly closer to him, but he moved to stand beside Nia, his preference clear once again. Echo's mouth tightened into a thin line, though she quickly masked her displeasure. "I need some air," Nia said, the cabin suddenly feeling airless with the weight of unspoken accusations. I'll join you, Zion replied instantly, following her onto the porch. Outside, the night air carried the metallic scent of approaching rain. Lightning flickered between distant clouds, briefly illuminating the surrounding forest before plunging it back into deeper darkness. Nya leaned against the railing, hands gripping the rough wood for stability in a world that suddenly seemed built on quicksand. "Do you believe her?" she asked quietly. "About the experiment? About murder?" Zion stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "I don't know what to believe," he admitted, "but something isn't right about this retreat. It hasn't been from the beginning." Nya considered telling him about the journals she'd found in the cellar, but caution held her back. If Talia was correct and someone in their group was dangerous, sharing her discovery might put her at risk. "Why did Echo really come here?" she asked instead. "It can't be coincidence." Zion's jaw tightened. "Number, it's not coincidence." "Then what?" He turned to face her fully, his expression grave in the dim porch light. "Echo has been pursuing me since our relationship ended. When I disappear from my usual routines, she finds ways to locate me." "Pursuing or stalking?" Nia asked bluntly. A humorless smile touched his lips. "The line has certainly blurred." He looked out at the darkened forest. "I should have recognized her hand in this the moment our guide conveniently disappeared. This has Echo's fingerprints all over it. You think she engineered this entire retreat? For what purpose? To get me alone, to force a confrontation on her terms." Naya processed this. "But how would she even know you were coming here? And what about the rest of us? Talia's claims?" Before Zion could answer, the porch door opened, spilling light and tension onto the weathered boards. Amara stood in the doorway, her usually serene expression troubled. "You'll both want to hear this," she said. "Talia is ready to talk." Inside, the group had gathered in the living room. Talia sat in an armchair, a mug of something steaming clasped between trembling hands. She looked smaller somehow, her ranger's authority diminished by fear. "15 years ago," she began without preamble, "I wasn't a ranger. I was a psychology graduate student working as an assistant to Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, the founder of Whispering Pines. The retreat center was her laboratory, a controlled environment to study human dynamics among strangers in isolation." She took a shaking sip from her mug before continuing. "Participants believed they were attending a standard wilderness retreat, but every interaction was monitored, recorded, analyzed. Blackwood was particularly interested in how quickly people formed bonds under stress, and how easily those bonds could be manipulated or broken." "That's unethical," Kai objected. "You can't experiment on people without consent." "Of course it was unethical," Talia agreed. "I realized that too late. By the time I understood the true nature of Blackwood's work, Gabriela Suarez was dead." A charged silence followed this statement. "What happened to her?" Violet finally asked, her journalistic instincts evidently overriding her fear. Talia's gaze dropped to her mug. The official investigation ruled it an accident, a fall during a solo hike. But I saw the surveillance footage. Gabriella had discovered hidden cameras in her room. She confronted Blackwood, threatened exposure. The next day, she was dead. "You're saying this Blackwood woman murdered her?" Marcus asked skeptically. "I'm saying Gabriella didn't fall. She was pushed." Talia's hands tightened around her mug. "I couldn't prove it. The footage from that section of trail mysteriously corrupted. Without evidence, I did the only thing I could. I quit the program and spent years working to become a ranger so I could protect these mountains and the people who visit them." "That doesn't explain why you think we're in danger now," Echo pointed out, her arms crossed defensively. "Because this retreat isn't legitimate," Talia replied. "There is no official Whispering Pines program anymore. The property was abandoned after Blackwood lost her funding. When I saw hikers heading toward the old cabin, I investigated and found you all, a perfect recreation of Blackwood's experimental groups. 7 strangers, no legitimate guide, and when I accessed the old ranger station records, I found this. She withdrew a folded paper from her pocket, spreading it on the coffee table. It was an employment application dated 3 weeks earlier, the signature at the bottom a flowing script spelling Eleanor Blackwood. "She's back," Talia said simply, "and one of you is working with her." The accusation landed like a grenade, each person drawing back from the others with new wariness. "This is insane," Marcus declared. "I signed up for this retreat through Adventure Outfitters. It was completely legitimate." "As did I," Violet added. "My editor confirmed the booking." One by one, each person described how they'd found the retreat, through seemingly legitimate channels that nonetheless had delivered them into this isolation. "What about you?" Marcus suddenly turned to Talia. "How convenient that you show up with wild stories right when tension is building. Maybe you're Blackwood's accomplice." "Or Blackwood herself," Kai suggested. Talia shook her head vehemently. "I'm trying to save you. We need to leave at first light before—" A tremendous crash of thunder interrupted her, immediately followed by power failure as the generator abruptly died. In the sudden darkness, someone gasped. A flashlight beam cut through the blackness. Zion prepared after the earlier outage. "Everyone stay calm," he instructed, passing a second flashlight to Marcus. "Let's not turn on each other. We'll check the generator." "I'm coming too," Naya said immediately, unwilling to let Zion out of her sight. "We'll all go," Amara decided. "Safety in numbers." They moved as a group through the kitchen and out the back door, flashlight beams dancing erratically across the rain-slicked ground. The generator shed stood 20 yards behind the cabin, a utilitarian structure partially concealed by overgrown bushes. Zion reached it first, pulling open the door to reveal an empty interior. "The generator's gone," he reported incredulously. "That's impossible," Marcus insisted, pushing past to confirm. It was bolted to the concrete. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Only severed cables and mounting brackets remained where the machine had stood. Even more disturbing, fresh footprints marked the muddy floor, already filling with rainwater. "Someone was just here," Naya whispered, fear constricting her throat, "while we were all inside." The implications settled over them like the steadily increasing rainfall. They weren't alone on the mountain. "Back to the cabin," Zion ordered. "Now!" They hurried through the intensifying rain, shoulders hunched against the deluge. Only upon reaching the relative safety of the kitchen did they realize someone was missing. "Where's Talia?" Jasmine asked, wide-eyed. A quick search confirmed the ranger had vanished. On the kitchen table lay her mug. Beside it, a hastily scrawled note. "She knows I've warned you. Not safe here. Meet me at Dawn Peak. First light." "This is beyond ridiculous," Echo declared, water streaming from her copper hair. "We're not characters in some thriller novel." "Tell that to whoever stole a bolted-down generator," Kai retorted. As they argued about their next steps, Nia felt a gentle touch on her elbow. Amara, somehow still composed despite the chaos, gestured subtly toward the pantry. "A moment, dear," the older woman murmured. Curious, Nia followed her into the pantry, where Amara carefully closed the door behind them. "During your time in the cellar," Amara began without preamble, "did you happen to find anything interesting?" Naya's breath caught. "How did you know about the journals?" Amara finished with a sad smile. "Because I wrote them." The confession struck Naya speechless. Amara, gentle, wise Amara, was connected to this twisted experiment. "Not in the way you're thinking," Amara continued, reading Nia's expression. "I was Blackwood's first research partner before Talia, before things went wrong." "You knew about Gabriella?" Nia managed finally. Amara's eyes clouded with old pain. I had already left the program by then. Blackwood and I disagreed fundamentally about methodology. She wanted to create stress to observe responses. I believed in observing natural interactions without interference. When I refused to continue, she replaced me with younger, more malleable assistants, like Talia. Why are you here now? Because 3 weeks ago I received an invitation to this retreat, clearly orchestrated by Eleanor, though she didn't sign her name. I came to confront her, to end this obsession before someone else got hurt. Amara's voice dropped to a whisper. But I fear I'm too late. The game has already begun. Game? What game? Eleanor views human connection as a grand experiment, truth or dare on an elaborate scale. She believes people reveal their true nature only when properly motivated by fear or desire. Amara gripped Naya's hands urgently. Listen carefully. I don't believe Eleanor would return to the scene of her crime without significant preparation. Whatever is happening here was planned meticulously. You think one of us is working with her, Naya concluded. I think one of us may be Eleanor herself, Amara corrected. She was a master of disguise even 15 years ago. It was part of how she observed participants without their knowledge. The implication staggered Naya. You suspect someone in our group is actually Blackwood in disguise. But who? That's what we must determine, and quickly. Amara's eyes held Naya's steadily. I believe you and Zion are genuine. Your connection has developed too naturally to be fabricated. But the others... A sharp knock on the pantry door interrupted her. Everything okay in there? Zion called. Fine, Naya replied, trying to keep her voice level. Just looking for more candles. Amara squeezed her hand once more before reaching for a box of emergency candles on a nearby shelf. Trust your instincts, she whispered, and watch the water. The water, Naya repeated, confused. Eleanor's research focused on fear responses. Each participant's deepest fear became her favorite tool against them. Amara handed her the candles. Your darkness, my heights, Jasmine's water. Understanding dawned. You think Jasmine is in danger. I think we all are. Amara reached past Naya to open the door. But some more immediately than others. They rejoined the group, who had established a makeshift command center in the living room, illuminated by flashlights and the fireplace's warm glow. Maps were spread across the coffee table as they debated the best route to Dawn Peak. It's at least 4 hours in good conditions, Marcus was saying, tracing a path with his finger. In rain, with Kai's ankle, more like 6. We can't just stay here waiting for someone to pick us off, Violet argued. That's literally the plot of every horror movie. Nobody's getting picked off, Zion said firmly. We stay together, we stay alert, and we leave at first light. And until then, Echo challenged, we just trust that everyone in this room is who they claim to be. The question hung heavily in the air, each person eyeing the others with renewed suspicion. We take watches, Jasmine suggested. 2 people awake at all times, rotating every 2 hours. The proposal was met with reluctant agreement. Zion organized the rotation, deliberately pairing Naya with himself for the pre-dawn shift. No one objected, though Echo's displeasure radiated like heat. As they prepared to settle in for a tense night, Jasmine approached Nia quietly. Could I possibly have some water? My throat. She gestured helplessly at her neck, voice indeed sounding raspy. Remembering Amara's warning, Naya hesitated. I can get it, she offered, not wanting Jasmine near the kitchen sink alone. Don't be silly, Jasmine smiled thinly. I need the bathroom anyway, just wasn't sure where glasses were kept. Cabinet above the dishwasher, Nia replied, watching carefully as Jasmine disappeared into the hallway. Minutes passed, then 5, then 10. Unease prickled along Nia's spine. "Jasmine's been gone a while," she mentioned to Zion, trying to keep her voice casual. He frowned. "Bathroom and kitchen aren't that far." A muffled thump from the direction of the bathroom galvanized them both. Zion was on his feet instantly, Nia close behind as they hurried down the hallway. The bathroom door stood ajar, but no light emerged from within. "Jasmine," Nia called, pushing the door wider. The bathroom was empty, but the small window above the shower stood open, rain spattering the tiled floor beneath it. More disturbing was the message scrawled in lipstick across the mirror. "Truth or dare? Your turn." Zion immediately raised the alarm, bringing the others running. A quick search confirmed what they already knew. Jasmine had vanished into the stormy night. The kitchen revealed another clue. The back door unlocked, a woman's footprint visible in mud on the doormat. "She left voluntarily," Marcus pointed out. "Nobody smashed that window or broke down the door." "Or she was lured," Amara countered softly. Kai stared at the lipstick message, face pale. "This isn't random. That message is for me." "What do you mean?" Violet demanded. "Truth or dare? It was our game. Mine and Jasmine's." His voice caught. "Back in freshman year, we used to play it for hours. It became our thing, our private joke. When things got awkward between us, she'd still sometimes text just those words, truth or dare. It was her way of asking if we could talk honestly." "So someone is using your history against you," Zion concluded. "Deliberately." "We have to find her," Kai insisted, already moving toward the door despite his injured ankle. "Not in this storm," Zion blocked his path. "That's exactly what someone wants, to separate us, pick us off, one by one in the darkness. She could be hurt, or worse." Kai's desperate eyes swept the group. "What if this Blackwood person has her?" "Wait," Nia interrupted, a thought striking her. "Amara said something about water, about fears." She turned to Kai. "Is Jasmine afraid of water? Swimming? Anything like that?" Kai's face drained of remaining color. "Terrified. Her cousin drowned when they were kids. She can't even take baths, only showers." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "The waterfall. Oh God, the waterfall." "What waterfall?" Echo demanded. "About half a mile west," Kai explained frantically. "We found it yesterday during our hike. There's a deep pool beneath it. If someone wanted to exploit her fear of water. We need lights, ropes, first aid supplies." Zion took command instantly. "Kai, you're staying here with your ankle. Marcus, get the emergency kit from the hall closet. Echo, find every flashlight and battery in this place. Nya, Amara, Violet, warm clothes and blankets. She'll be hypothermic if she's been in that water." As they scattered to gather supplies, Nya felt a whisper of breath against her ear as Amara passed. "Watch Zion," the older woman murmured. "Whatever happens, don't let him out of your sight." Nie nodded imperceptibly, already calculating how to stay close to him during the search. If Amara was right and someone in their group was orchestrating these events, no one could be trusted completely, except perhaps the person whose kiss still lingered in her memory like a promise of something genuine in a landscape of deception. Within minutes, they had assembled their rescue gear and stood at the back door, rain lashing against the porch beyond. "Remember," Zion instructed, "we stay together. No matter what we find, no matter what happens, we do not separate." Thunder punctuated his words as if nature itself acknowledged the gravity of their situation. One by one, they stepped into the deluge, flashlight beams cutting weak paths through sheets of rain that seemed determined to erase their existence from the mountainside. Behind them, the cabin's windows glowed faintly with the light of banked embers, a deceptive beacon of safety in a night that concealed more danger than any of them yet realized. for as they moved toward the distant sound of rushing water, none suspected that they were fulfilling each step of a plan laid long before any of them had set foot on the mountain, a plan that would test not only their courage, but the very nature of the connections forming between them. The dare had been issued, the game had begun, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, truth awaited, a truth that would irrevocably transform 7 strangers into either the closest of allies or the deadliest of enemies. Chapter 7. Midnight Confessions. The waterfall roared like a living beast, swollen with rain and fury. 5 flashlight beams danced across the churning pool below, searching desperately for any sign of Jasmine. "There!" Naya shouted over the storm, pointing to something pale caught against rocks near the edge. Zion was already moving, securing a rope around his waist. "Hold this," he instructed Marcus. "If I tug twice, pull me back." "Be careful," Naya urged, fighting the urge to grab his arm, to prevent him from entering the dangerous water. With measured steps, Zion descended toward the thrashing pool. What they had spotted wasn't Jasmine, but her scarf, deliberately placed where it would be found. As Zion retrieved it, a flash of lightning illuminated the entire clearing, and the message carved into the bark of a nearby tree. "Higher ground." "She's leading us somewhere," Zion realized, rejoining the group. "This was staged. Or someone's staging it to look like she's leaving clues," Violet countered. They followed a narrow path uphill, the rain gradually lessening as they climbed. Near the summit, they found the cave, a black mouth in the mountainside from which warm light spilled. Inside, Jasmine sat calmly beside a small campfire, completely dry. "Took you long enough," she remarked, expression unreadable. "What the hell?" Marcus exploded. "We thought you were in danger." "I am," Jasmine replied. "We all are, but not from what you think." Her eyes fixed on Echo. "Tell them who you really are." Echo's face betrayed nothing. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you, Dr. Blackwood?" Jasmine stood, suddenly commanding. "Or do you prefer Eleanor now?" Stunned silence fell over the group. Echo laughed, though the sound held no humor. "This is absurd." "Is it?" Jasmine produced a folded paper from her pocket. "I found this while searching the cabin earlier. Your real ID, carelessly left in a hidden compartment of your luggage." Nia expected denial, outrage. Instead, Echo's posture subtly shifted, her entire demeanor transforming before their eyes. The change was unsettling, like watching someone shed a mask they'd worn so long it had begun to adhere to their skin. "Clever girl," Echo said softly, her voice deeper, more authoritative than before, though not clever enough to leave well enough alone. "You murdered Gabriella," Jasmine accused, "and now you're recreating your experiment with us." Eleanor's demeanor transformed completely, her posture straightening as she shed Echo's persona entirely. Gabriella made a tragic choice that day. She threatened exposure, became volatile, and in the struggle, she gestured dismissively. Physics did the rest. "Why come back?" Amara asked, her voice heavy with old grief. "Why risk exposure after all these years?" "For the same reason you came, old friend, to finish what we started." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Zion, "and to meet the elusive Mr. Rivers in person, the reclusive billionaire whose hidden depths I've studied for years. Your companies are masterpieces of psychological manipulation. Did you know that? Your marketing strategies exploit fundamental human vulnerabilities with surgical precision." Nia turned to Zion, confusion and betrayal warring in her chest. "Billionaire?" Zion's expression hardened as he faced Eleanor. This entire retreat was a setup. To what end? Some twisted research paper. "Research is merely a byproduct," Eleanor replied. "My primary interest was observing you, Zion, a man who built an empire on understanding human behavior while remaining personally isolated. I wanted to see what would happen when that isolation was breached. Her eyes flicked to Naya. And it was breached rather beautifully, wasn't it? You manipulated everything, Naya realized aloud. The game, the power outage, even the cellar dare. I merely created the conditions. Your reactions were entirely authentic. And Talia, Amara demanded. Where is she? Unconscious but alive, back at the cabin. She was becoming inconvenient. Eleanor withdrew something from her jacket, a small black device with a blinking red light. Now we've reached the experiment's final phase. What is that? Marcus asked warily. Insurance. This trigger will activate charges placed throughout the cabin. Nothing lethal, just enough to ensure cooperation. Zion took a deliberate step forward. This ends now. Does it? Eleanor smiled. Truth or dare, Mr. Rivers? Truth. Admit who you really are to your new friends. Or dare. Risk everything to stop me. For a moment, no one moved. Then, with lightning speed, Jasmine lunged toward Eleanor, knocking the trigger from her hand. It skittered across the cave floor as the two women grappled. In the chaos, Naya could only watch as Zion dove for the device, while Marcus and Violet moved to subdue Eleanor. This changes nothing, Eleanor shouted as they restrained her. The experiment continues. Observer effect. You're all still playing my game. Outside, dawn broke over the mountain, painting the cave entrance with pale golden light. The storm had passed, leaving wreckage and revelation in its wake. As Zion secured the trigger device, his eyes met Nia's across the cave, filled with regret, explanation, and something deeper that couldn't be named in the aftermath of deception. The truth about Zion Rivers had been forced into the open, and with it, the question that would haunt Naya for the remainder of their retreat. Had anything between them been real, or was she simply another variable in someone else's experiment? Chapter 8. Truth in Thunder. The return to the cabin felt like a funeral procession, solemn, silent, with Eleanor echo firmly between Marcus and Zion, her wrists bound with climbing rope. The morning sun revealed a landscape transformed by the storm, fallen branches, mud-slicked trails, and the occasional uprooted sapling testified to nature's overnight fury. Nye walked apart from the others, her mind replaying Eleanor's revelation about Zion. A billionaire, the reclusive CEO whose face rarely appeared in media. She'd kissed a man whose life existed in a realm so far removed from her small bookstore that they might as well inhabit different planets. Several times Zion attempted to fall back beside her, but she quickened her pace, avoiding his eyes. She needed space to process not just his deception, but her own naivete. How easily she'd been manipulated by Eleanor's experimental design, by Zion's selective truths, by her own desperate longing for connection. At the cabin, they found Talia regaining consciousness on the living room sofa, a nasty bruise blooming across her temple. Kai had fashioned a makeshift ice pack for her, his natural caretaking instincts apparently overriding his worry about Jasmine. "You found her," he said with relief when Jasmine walked through the door. His eyes narrowed upon seeing Eleanor restrained. What happened? While the others explained, Nia slipped away to her room, craving solitude. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at nothing, until a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Not now, Zion," she called, assuming his identity. "It's Amara, dear." Nia hesitated, then crossed to unlock the door. The older woman entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. "Chamomile," Amara said, offering one to Nia. "Nature's balm for troubled minds." They sat together in silence for several minutes, the warmth from the mugs seeping into their cold hands. Finally, Amara spoke. "He wanted to tell you." Nia looked up sharply. "You knew?" Amara nodded. "I recognized him immediately. My late husband was an avid reader of financial news. Zion River's innovations in sustainable technology investment were frequently on our breakfast table. Why didn't you say anything? For the same reason he didn't, I imagine. Sometimes we need spaces where we can simply be without the weight of public perception. Amara studied her over the rim of her mug. His wealth doesn't change who he is. Doesn't it? Nya challenged. Lies of omission are still lies. True, but consider what truth you're actually angry about. That he has money, or that he has a life you believe excludes the possibility of yours intersecting with it meaningfully. Before Naya could respond, another knock sounded. This time it was Zion himself, his tall frame filling the doorway with tense energy. "Eleanor's asking for you," he said to Naya. "Both of you, actually." Amara rose smoothly. "Then we shouldn't keep her waiting. The answers to old questions often unveil new possibilities." Downstairs, Eleanor sat at the dining table, still bound but emanating an unsettling calm. When Naya and Amara entered, she smiled as if greeting expected guests at a dinner party. "The bookstore owner and the professor emeritus," she said. "My most interesting subjects." "We're not your subjects," Naya replied coldly. "Aren't you? You've been performing beautifully in my experimental framework." Eleanor leaned forward. "Tell me, what did it feel like discovering Zion's true identity? That specific moment of betrayal overlaid with the lingering physical memory of intimacy. That's empirical gold." "Stop it," Zion warned from his position by the window. Eleanor ignored him. "And you, Amara, still playing the wise observer after all these years? Some habits die hard." "What do you want, Eleanor?" Amara asked wearily. "To complete the experiment properly. We have unfinished business, you and I. The observation room still exists, you know. All the original equipment, upgraded over the years. Everything that happens in this cabin recorded for posterity." "You're going to prison," Marcus stated flatly. "For Gabriella, for kidnapping Talia, for whatever the hell this psychological torture scheme is." Eleanor laughed. "With what evidence? After 15 years? And who exactly will testify? The billionaire who came to a remote cabin under false pretenses? The ranger who abandoned her post? The psychology professor who participated in the original experiments? You're all compromised in ways you don't even realize." Her confidence was unnerving. Despite being restrained, she maintained an aura of control that suggested she held cards they couldn't see. "The phones have signal again," Jasmine reported, entering from the porch. "I reached emergency services. They're sending officers, but it will take several hours with the bridge out." "Excellent," Eleanor nodded, as if this too proceeded according to her design. "Just enough time for our final session." "There will be no session," Zion stated firmly. "Oh, but there must be. Truth or dare in its purest form. One final round to bring closure." Eleanor's eyes fixed on Nia. "You start. Truth or dare." "This is ridiculous," Nia began. "Truth. Orient dare," Eleanor repeated, each word precise as a scalpel. Something in her tone, a hidden threat, perhaps, made Nia hesitate. "Truth," she finally said, if only to end the unsettling standoff. Eleanor smiled. "Do you believe love can transcend circumstance? That connection between souls exists independent of external factors like wealth, background, or physical proximity?" The question was unexpectedly philosophical rather than invasive. Nia considered her answer carefully, aware of Zion's gaze upon her. "I believe genuine connection is rare," she finally replied. "When it occurs, external factors become negotiable, not irrelevant but surmountable." Eleanor nodded as if receiving confirmation of a hypothesis. "Interesting. Zion, truth or dare?" He crossed his arms. "I'm not playing." "A shame. I'd have asked why you built walls so high around your heart that it took an experimental isolation scenario for you to finally let someone glimpse the man behind the empire. Eleanor sighed theatrically. Perhaps another time. There won't be another time, Talia said from the sofa, her voice stronger now. This ends today. Does it? Eleanor's expression shifted subtly, a predator's focus sharpening. One last truth, freely given. Did any of you wonder why 7 strangers were selected for this particular retreat? Why these specific 7? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Because you're all connected, Eleanor continued, her voice taking on an almost reverent quality. Amara rejected Jasmine's graduate school application, but wrote a recommendation that got her into Emerson instead. Marcus invested in the technology that powers Zion's sustainable energy initiative. Nia's grandmother saved Violet's mother from drowning at Folly Beach 30 years ago. And Talia, her voice softened. Dear, dedicated Talia carries Gabriella's blood in her veins, her own sister. This final revelation elicited a gasp from several people. Talia's face confirmed the truth of it, pain etched in every line. The human constellation, Eleanor concluded with satisfaction, invisible threads binding apparent strangers. My life's work, exemplified in this room. Before anyone could respond, distant thunder rumbled, the approaching sound of helicopter rotors rather than another storm. Relief washed over the group, except for Eleanor, whose smile never faltered. Right on schedule, she murmured, almost to herself. As the others moved toward the porch to signal the helicopter, Naya found herself momentarily alone with Eleanor. The woman leaned forward, voice dropping to an intimate whisper. He loves you, you know. I didn't anticipate that variable. It's the first genuine emotion I've observed in him throughout years of study. Her eyes gleamed with academic interest rather than human empathy. What will you do with that data point, I wonder? Before Naya could respond, Zion returned to escort Eleanor outside. Left alone, Naya struggled to process everything, the experiment, the connections, and most of all the possibility that what she'd felt with Zion was neither manipulation nor temporary insanity, but something real that now required her to make a choice, retreat to her safe, familiar life, or step toward an unknown future with a man she'd glimpsed only briefly beneath layers of protective armor. Outside, the helicopter descended, bearing not only law enforcement, but the promise of return to the world beyond Whispering Pines, a world that suddenly seemed both more complex and more promising than the one Nia had left behind 5 days earlier. Chapter 9. Final Night Confessions. The helicopter departed with Eleanor and 2 police officers, leaving behind 5 shell-shocked retreat participants, 1 recovering ranger, and a cabin full of unresolved emotions. The authorities had taken statements, cataloged evidence from Eleanor's observation room, hidden behind the cellar wall, and promised to return the following morning to escort everyone safely down the mountain. One more night, Marcus observed, watching the helicopter disappear over the ridge. Feels anticlimactic. I think we've had enough climax for one retreat, Violet replied dryly. She'd spent the past hour on her phone, presumably filing the story of a lifetime. Evening descended with unnatural quiet. They prepared dinner together, moving around the kitchen in wordless choreography, the shared trauma creating efficiency where personality might otherwise cause friction. Only Zion remained separate, having disappeared shortly after the helicopter's departure. Naya found him on the far side of the lake where they'd watched otters just days earlier, a lifetime ago, it seemed. He sat on the same rock, skipping stones across the now calm surface with mechanical precision. 10 skips, she observed, stopping several feet away. Impressive. Useless skill number 73, he replied without turning, alongside speed-reading quarterly reports and remembering the names of people I'd rather forget. She approached cautiously, perching on the edge of the rock. "Is Zion Rivers even your real name?" This earned a small smile. "It is, though most business publications add the third after it, which I find pretentious." "The third," Naya repeated. "So there's a dynasty." "Was. My father and grandfather died in the same plane crash when I was 23. I inherited everything. The companies, the responsibilities, the expectations." He skipped another stone. "And the isolation." The simple admission softened something in Naya's chest. "Is that why you came here? To escape?" "Initially, yes. I've spent years building walls between myself and the world. Retreat felt like an appropriate euphemism." He finally turned to face her. "But then I met someone who made me want to tear those walls down brick by brick." The naked vulnerability in his expression caught Nia off guard. This was not the calculated charm of a corporate titan or the practiced sincerity of a public figure. This was simply a man, imperfect and uncertain, offering truth without expectation. "I was angry," she admitted. "Not about who you are, but that you didn't trust me with the truth." "It wasn't about trust, I just—" He searched for words. "For 5 days, I wasn't being evaluated for my net worth or strategic value. I was just a man who worked with numbers, who liked poetry and stargazing, and a woman who saw the world through stories." His voice dropped. "Do you know how rare that is for me?" Nia did know, in her own way. The bookstore had become both sanctuary and prison, a place where customers saw only what they needed from her, never the loneliness that lingered after closing time. "What happens when we leave this mountain?" she asked quietly. "That depends on you." He moved slightly closer. "My life is complicated, public in ways I hate, and private in ways that can feel like exile. But I've never wanted to share it with anyone until now." "You barely know me," Naya protested, though her heart raced treacherously. "I know enough. You value truth but understand the power of fiction. You're brave in quiet ways that matter more than grand gestures. You've built a meaningful life from grief and obligation without becoming bitter." His fingers brushed hers tentatively. "And you kissed me like you'd been waiting your whole life to be seen." Heat bloomed in Naya's cheeks at the memory. "Eleanor manipulated everything. The game, the pairings, the challenges. How can we trust anything that happened here? She created the conditions, yes, but she didn't create what happened between us." Zion's eyes held hers steadily. "That was real, at least for me." Before Naya could respond, voices called their names from the direction of the cabin. They returned to find an impromptu gathering forming in the living room, complete with retrieved bourbon and an air of determined celebration. "Last night on the mountain," Jasmine explained, passing them glasses. "We're having a proper wake for our retreat from hell." The evening transformed into something unexpected, genuine connection emerging from shared ordeal. Marcus revealed he'd been sent to scout the location for a reality show, but was now considering a documentary about psychological manipulation instead. Violet admitted her fashion career was largely fabricated. She was actually a crime writer researching a novel. Kai and Jasmine acknowledged their complex history, former high school sweethearts whose relationship had imploded during freshman year after a devastating miscarriage. "Truth or Dare brought us together originally," Jasmine explained, her head resting on Kai's shoulder. "Seems fitting it would reunite us, even through this twisted version." When it was Amara's turn, she surprised everyone by revealing her connection to the original experiments had been more than professional. "Eleanor and I were partners," she admitted, "in every sense. Her brilliance attracted me first, then her passion for understanding human connection. The irony that she could analyze it but never truly experience it took years to recognize." "Why did you really come to this retreat?" Talia asked softly. Amara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. to forgive her, and myself, for Gabriella, for the ethical lines we crossed, for the damage done in the name of research. She sipped her bourbon. Some closure must be created internally when external justice proves elusive. The circle turned to Naya, who had remained mostly silent. "Your turn," Jasmine encouraged. "One truth before we leave this place behind." Naya felt Zion's presence beside her, neither touching nor pulling away. "I came here because my grandmother's death left me sleepwalking through life," she began slowly. "I was hiding in books instead of writing my own story." Her eyes met Zion's briefly. "I'm still figuring out the next chapter." As midnight approached, the gathering gradually dispersed. Jasmine and Kai disappeared toward the porch. Marcus and Violet engaged in intense conversation by the fireplace. Amara retired to her room, the weight of old revelations evident in her measured steps. Nia lingered in the kitchen, washing glasses that would be left behind tomorrow. Zion appeared beside her, silently accepting a towel to dry them. "Whatever you decide," he said after several minutes of companionable silence. "About us, about what happens next. I want you to know these 5 days changed me, regardless of how they began or what Eleanor intended." The simple sincerity in his voice resonated through Naya like a tuning fork, striking the exact frequency of her uncertainty. In that moment, standing in a cabin kitchen surrounded by the wreckage of an elaborate psychological experiment, something shifted, fear giving way to possibility. "I need time," she said finally. "Space to think without manipulation or pressure." "Of course." His disappointment was visible despite his effort to mask it. "But," she continued, finding courage in his vulnerability, "I'd like to see you again, on neutral ground, where we can discover who we are outside this bubble." Hope transformed his features. "Name the time and place. I'll be there." As they finished the dishes in silence, their fingers occasionally brushing in the soapy water, Naya realized that Eleanor had been both entirely wrong and accidentally right. She had indeed created the conditions for human connection, but the connection itself remained beyond her control, authentic in ways her clinical observations could never capture. Tomorrow they would descend the mountain, returning to lives temporarily suspended. But something had begun in this unlikely laboratory of human emotion, something neither manipulation nor deception had created, and therefore could not destroy. Whether it would flourish beyond Whispering Pines remained a question only time could answer. Chapter 10. Moonlight Promises. Sleep eluded Naya on their final night at Whispering Pines. She lay awake listening to the creaks and sighs of the cabin, her mind replaying the week's events like a film reel with missing frames. Just 5 days ago, she'd been a stranger among strangers. Now she carried pieces of each of them within her. Amara's wisdom, Jasmine's unexpected resilience, Kai's quiet loyalty, Marcus's carefully hidden idealism, Violet's reluctant vulnerability, and Zion, who had shattered her preconceptions and reassembled them into something both terrifying and exhilarating. Near midnight, she abandoned the pretense of sleep and slipped outside. The storm had cleared completely, leaving behind a sky so densely populated with stars it seemed almost artificial. A celestial tapestry stretching from horizon to horizon. The lake beckoned, its surface mirroring the constellations in perfect symmetry. She wasn't entirely surprised to find Zion already there, seated on their rock, gaze lifted skyward. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, approaching quietly. He shifted to make space for her. "Too much to process." They sat in companionable silence, the night sounds creating a gentle symphony around them. Crickets, distant owls, the occasional splash of fish in the lake. The moon hung low and heavy, casting silver light across the water. "I grew up in a town about this size," Zion said eventually, "before the companies, before the billions. Just a normal kid in rural Pennsylvania with a second-hand telescope and too many questions." Nya studied his profile, trying to reconcile the powerful businessman with this more approachable version. What happened to that kid? Life, expectations, tragedy. He exhaled slowly. My parents built something remarkable from nothing. When they died, preserving their legacy felt like the only way to keep them alive somehow. His fingers traced patterns on the stone between them. I've spent so long being Zion Rivers III that I sometimes forget the person beneath the name. Who is that person? Nia asked softly. His smile held a hint of wonder. I'm not entirely sure anymore, but this week, with you, I started remembering. The confession hung between them, simple yet profound. Naya recognized in it echoes of her own journey, how Gran's death had left her clinging to the bookstore as both tribute and shield against an uncertain future. I understand, she said. After Gran died, I kept everything exactly as she'd arranged it. Same inventory system, same reading nook arrangement, same apartment furniture. As if changing anything would erase her memory. And now I'm beginning to see that honoring her legacy doesn't mean becoming its curator. She built the bookstore so I could have a foundation, not a fortress. Zion nodded, eyes reflecting moonlight. Legacies should nurture, not entomb. The insight resonated between them like a perfect chord. Nia felt something shift, perspective realigning, possibilities expanding. For the first time since arriving at Whispering Pines, she felt truly centered, the manipulation and deception falling away to reveal something genuine at the core. I was serious earlier, she said quietly, about seeing you again. But I need to know who I'm seeing, the man from this week or Zion Rivers, the CEO. They're the same person, he replied, just different facets. The man you've known this week is more authentic than the public figure, but both are real. His hand found hers in the darkness. I'm not asking you to enter my world. I'm asking for the chance to find a world that works for both of us. The touch of his fingers against hers felt like coming home after a long journey. Not the familiar home of her bookstore apartment, but something new. A home not yet built, but already taking shape in the blueprint of possibility. I don't know what that looks like, she admitted, her practical nature asserting itself even as her heart raced. Neither do I, he confessed, and the simple admission carried more weight than any elaborate promise could have. But uncertainty doesn't diminish value, quite the opposite. A shooting star sliced through the darkness above them, leaving a brilliant trail that lingered on their retinas. Nya closed her eyes briefly, not wishing for answers or guarantees, but for something she'd never before allowed herself to request from the universe: courage to embrace the unknown. Charleston is lovely in autumn, she offered, a tentative first brick in whatever they might build. I have meetings in Atlanta next weekend, he replied. Charleston isn't far. The practical logistics, so mundane compared to the week's drama, somehow made everything more real. This wasn't a retreat fantasy or an isolated connection doomed to fade upon re-entry to normal life. This was two people making space for possibility. What will you tell your board of directors? She asked, half joking. That you're dating a small-town bookstore owner who barely remembers to check her investment portfolio quarterly. Zion laughed, the sound carrying across the lake. I'll tell them I'm unavailable for weekend meetings because I'm pursuing interests vital to my personal development. Is that what I am? A personal development project? His expression sobered. You're the first real thing I've felt in years. Everything else has been performance, necessary, sometimes even satisfying, but ultimately hollow. The simple declaration stole her breath. In her novels, this would be the moment for passionate declarations or life-altering decisions. But reality offered something different: the quiet recognition of potential, the gentle acknowledgement of fear, and the deliberate choice to move forward despite uncertainty. I'm not promising anything, she said carefully, Except that I want to know you better. The real you. That's all I'm asking for. His fingers intertwined with hers more securely. Time, honesty, possibility. The moon had risen higher now, its light creating a silver pathway across the lake, an invitation to journey, to discover, to explore beyond comfortable boundaries. Tomorrow they would return to their separate worlds, but tonight had created a bridge between them. Truth or dare, Zion whispered, echoing the game that had first connected them. Despite everything, Nya smiled. Truth. Are you afraid of what might happen if this is real? Terrified, she admitted without hesitation. You? Completely. His thumb traced gentle circles against her palm. Worth it, though, I think. Truth or dare, she echoed. Dare. She considered a moment. I dare you to show me the stars like you saw them when you were that kid in Pennsylvania. Before everything else. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He helped her lie back against the smooth stone, their shoulders touching as they faced the vast celestial canopy. With quiet reverence, he began tracing constellations, his voice painting stories across the sky, ancient myths and modern science intertwining as naturally as their fingers remained linked between them. They talked until the moon completed its journey and the eastern sky hinted at approaching dawn. Not just of stars, but of childhoods and dreams, failures and triumphs, fears and hopes. With each revelation, the connection between them strengthened, no longer dependent on Eleanor's manipulative framework, but standing firmly on its own foundation. As the first blush of sunrise tinted the horizon, they made their way back to the cabin, walking slowly as if to prolong these final hours. Before they reached the porch, Zion paused, turning to face Naya in the gentle morning light. One last truth, he said softly. Whatever happens next, I will never regret this week. Nia rose on tiptoes, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips, their first since discovering the truth of who he was. It held none of the desperate intensity of their storage room encounter, but something deeper, more certain. Neither will I, she whispered against his mouth. As they joined the others preparing for departure, the promise of that kiss lingered, not an ending, but a beginning. 5 days had transformed 7 strangers into something unexpected. Whatever came next would be written not by Eleanor's experimental design, but by their own choices, their own truths, their own dares to step beyond comfortable boundaries towards something authentic and rare. The mountain had revealed what the valley of everyday life so often obscured. That human connection, when genuine, transcends circumstance. Whether that connection could survive beyond Whispering Pines remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, Nya faced uncertainty, not with fear, but with anticipation. The final chapter of their retreat was ending, but the story itself had only just begun. Chapter 11. Paths Diverge. The helicopter returned at precisely 9 o'clock, its mechanical thunder shattering the morning stillness. 7 people stood on the clearing with packed bags and complicated expressions, no longer strangers, not quite friends, but irreversibly connected by shared experience. This feels oddly ceremonial, Marcus observed as they watched the aircraft descend. Like we should exchange friendship bracelets or something. I'd settle for contact information, Amara replied with a gentle smile. Some connections are worth maintaining. They had spent breakfast exchanging details, promises to stay in touch that everyone recognized might, or might not, materialize in the chaos of resumed lives. Jasmine and Kai had already made plans to meet in Atlanta the following weekend. Violet had requested exclusive interviews with everyone for her book, which had evolved from fiction to creative nonfiction based on extraordinary events. Marcus had offered Amara a consultant position for his documentary project about psychological manipulation. Only Naya and Zion had made no public declarations about future contact. Their moonlight conversation remained private, a delicate seedling they were both protecting from premature exposure. The pilot emerged, explaining they would descend in 2 trips due to weight restrictions. Amara, Talia, Marcus, and Violet would go first, followed by Naya, Zion, Jasmine, and Kai. As the first group prepared to board, Amara embraced Naya warmly. "Remember what I told you about recognizing something rare," she whispered. "Don't let fear blind you." "I'll try," Naya promised, suddenly reluctant to part from this woman who had become a surrogate grandmother figure in just 5 days. "Atlanta, Thanksgiving," Amara said firmly. "I'm hosting everyone. No excuses." With final waves and shouted goodbyes barely audible over the rotors, the first group departed, leaving the 4 youngest participants to wait in the sudden quiet of the clearing. Kai suggested walking to the lake for a final visit, but Nia declined, needing time alone to prepare for re-entry to her normal life. She wandered to the cabin porch, settling into the rocking chair that had witnessed so many conversations over the past 5 days. The mountains stretched before her, ridges fading into blue distance, indifferent to the human dramas that had unfolded in their shadow. "Mind some company?" Zion's voice carried from the doorway. Nia gestured to the adjacent chair. They rocked in companionable silence, the rhythmic creaking a soothing counterpoint to the tumult of emotions beneath the surface. "I've been thinking about what happens next," Zion began carefully, "after we leave this mountain." "Me too." "And?" Nia considered her words thoughtfully. "I think we need space to remember who we are outside this bubble, to make sure what we're feeling isn't just an artifact of circumstance." Though disappointment flickered across his face, Zion nodded. "I respect that." "It's not rejection," she clarified. "It's caution. We've experienced more in 5 days than some people do in months of dating. I need to process it all without pressure." "Of course." His voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened slightly where they gripped the chair arm. "For what it's worth, I've never been more certain of anything than I am about the connection between us." The declaration hung in the air between them, a truth so simply stated it required no embellishment. Nia fought the urge to respond with equal certainty, knowing she owed him and herself honest evaluation rather than emotional reaction. "3 weeks," she said finally. "Give me 3 weeks to resettle, to find my balance. Then, if you still feel the same way, I will." No hesitation, no uncertainty. "Then call me. Or better yet, visit the bookstore. See me in my natural habitat." She smiled slightly. "I want to know if what I feel for Zion from the retreat can translate to Zion Rivers, the CEO." He returned her smile, understanding evident in his eyes. "And I want to know if what I feel for Nae from the mountains remains when I'm surrounded by board meetings and quarterly projections." The distant sound of the returning helicopter ended their conversation. As they gathered their bags and joined Jasmine and Kai in the clearing, Nia felt strange lightness despite the uncertainty ahead, as if acknowledging the fragility of their connection had somehow strengthened it. The descent from Whispering Pines passed in a blur of spectacular vistas and subdued conversation. At the ranger station, 2 black SUVs awaited Zion, his security team, visibly relieved at his return. The juxtaposition was jarring. The man who had helped cook pasta and skipped stones was suddenly surrounded by earpieces and respectful deference. "My team," he explained unnecessarily, looking almost embarrassed. "Can we offer anyone a ride?" Jasmine and Kai accepted gratefully, their destination in the same direction as Zion's private airfield. But when he turned to Naya with quiet hope in his eyes, she shook her head. "I drove here," she reminded him. "My car's still in the lot." Something like disappointment crossed his features, quickly masked. "Of course." As the others loaded their bags into the waiting vehicles, Zion stepped closer to Naya, lowering his voice. "3 weeks?" "3 weeks," she confirmed. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small, smooth stone, one he must have collected from the lakeshore. "Until then," he said, pressing it into her palm. The simple gesture, so incongruous with the corporate tableau surrounding them, brought unexpected tears to Nia's eyes. This was the real Zion, the man who found meaning in simple things, despite having access to everything money could buy. "Until then," she echoed, closing her fingers around the stone. Their goodbye was brief, witnessed by curious security personnel and their fellow retreat participants. No dramatic kisses or elaborate promises, just the light touch of his hand against hers and eyes that conveyed what words could not. Nia watched the sleek vehicles disappear around the curve, their tinted windows concealing Zion from view. She turned toward her weathered sedan with its faded bumper sticker advertising last year's literary festival. The juxtaposition was almost comical, her life and his represented in automotive form. Yet the stone in her pocket felt neither heavy nor burdensome, but rather alive with possibility. Not can this work, but how might this work? As she drove home alone, the familiar route to Charleston felt both unchanged and utterly different. The bookstore waited. Customers would return tomorrow, bills would need paying, and inventory would require restocking. Life would resume its predictable rhythm. Yet she was returning fundamentally altered, more aware of her own capacity for connection, more conscious of the walls she'd built around her heart, more willing to consider possibilities beyond her carefully constructed routine. Whether those possibilities included Zion Rivers remained to be seen, but for the first time since Grant's death, Naya felt truly alive, not simply existing, but participating fully in the unfolding story of her own life. Whatever came next, she would face it with new awareness that sometimes the greatest truths emerge only when we dare to step beyond comfortable boundaries. The mountain receded in her rearview mirror, but its lessons remained. 5 days had changed everything. The next 3 weeks would determine whether that change was temporary transformation or permanent evolution. Chapter 12. Truth. Found autumn painted Charleston in shades of amber and gold as 3 weeks stretched into 4. Nya moved through her days with surface normalcy, ordering books, hosting story time for neighborhood children, balancing accounts with meticulous care. Yet beneath this routine flowed an undercurrent of anticipation, each day bringing the question, would today be the day? Zion hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't emailed. The silence wasn't what she'd expected, though she couldn't decide if she felt disappointed or relieved. Perhaps both. The retreat experience had begun to take on a dreamlike quality, intense but increasingly distant, like a film viewed long ago whose details blurred while the emotional impact remained. On the 28th day, Nia hosted a small community reading event in the bookstore. Local authors would share poetry and short fiction, a quarterly tradition Gran had established years earlier. She arranged chairs in concentric semicircles, set out wine and cheese on the antique sideboard, and placed programs on each seat. People began arriving promptly at 7. Professors from the college, retirees, aspiring writers, and the loyal customers who formed the backbone of her business. Nya greeted each with genuine warmth, momentarily forgetting the calendar counting days since the mountain. At 7:15, as she prepared to introduce the first reader, the bell above the door chimed. She turned automatically, welcome words forming, and froze. Zion stood in the doorway, rain glistening in his hair, his tall frame incongruous among the bookshelves. He wore no suit, no corporate armor, just jeans and a simple sweater that somehow made him appear more handsome than any tailored outfit could have. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and everything between them, the mountain, the truths, the connection, crystallized into this single moment of recognition. He found an empty chair in the back row, offering a small smile that asked permission to stay. Naya nodded imperceptibly before turning to introduce the first poet, her voice remarkably steady despite her thundering heart. The readings proceeded beautifully, words weaving magic in the warm bookstore air. Yet Naya registered little beyond the knowledge of Zion's presence, his attention on each speaker respectful and engaged. He belonged here, she realized with quiet surprise, not as the billionaire CEO, but as a man who appreciated words and the people who crafted them carefully. When the formal program concluded, guests mingled over refreshments. Nya circulated among them, performing her role as host while hyper-aware of Zion's gradual movement toward her. They reached for the same cheese plate simultaneously, fingers brushing with electric familiarity. "Your bookstore is exactly as I imagined," he said quietly. "A perfect reflection of you." "You're late," she replied, surprising herself with the directness. "I was respecting your timeline. You said 3 weeks. It's been 28 days. 28 days, 6 hours, and approximately 17 minutes, he corrected with a small smile. But who's counting? The precision of his answer, simultaneously amusing and touching, melted something within her. He had been counting too. "Walk with me," he asked when the last guests had departed. "There's something I need to show you." Outside, Charleston's historic streets glistened beneath street lamps, recent rain making everything shine. They walked in comfortable silence, shoulders occasionally brushing, until they reached the small park 3 blocks from the bookstore. Beneath an ancient oak tree, Zion stopped, turning to face her fully. "I've missed you," he said simply. "More than I expected. More than seems reasonable after just 5 days of knowing you." "I've missed you too," Nya admitted, the truth easier to speak in darkness. "But I needed this time. I know. That's why I waited, even when everything in me wanted to call, to see you, to make sure what we experienced wasn't just some mountain mirage." He took a deep breath. "I needed to be certain before I showed you this." From his pocket, he withdrew a slim portfolio, offering it almost shyly. Curious, Naya opened it beneath the nearest street lamp. Inside were architectural renderings, beautiful, detailed plans for a building. Her confusion must have shown on her face because Zion began explaining rapidly. "It's a community literacy center, adjacent to your bookstore, not replacing it. A place where children could have access to books regardless of means, where adults could improve reading skills without stigma, where authors could give workshops and readings." His words tumbled out with uncharacteristic nervousness. The Rivers Foundation would fund it entirely, but it would operate independently. You would have complete creative control if you wanted involvement, or none at all if you preferred separation. Nya stared at the renderings, understanding dawning slowly. This wasn't a grand gesture of romantic pursuit. This was Zion revealing his true self through action, showing her that he had listened to her passion for literacy, her commitment to community, her desire to expand her grandmother's legacy beyond retail sales. "This isn't about us," he continued carefully. "It's about something that matters deeply to you, which means it matters to me. Whether or not you ever wanted to see me again, this center would still be worthwhile." The distinction was crucial, a gift without strings, a project with integrity beyond their personal connection. Emotion swelled in Naya's throat, too complex for immediate words. "You've been planning this for 4 weeks," she finally managed. "Actually, since our conversation by the lake, when you talked about your grandmother's legacy and your vision for what the bookstore could become." He ran a hand through damp hair. "I know it might seem presumptuous." "It's perfect," Naya interrupted softly. "Not presumptuous. Perfect." Relief transformed his features. They stood together beneath the ancient oak, rain beginning again as gentle mist around them. In that moment, the gap between their worlds, which had seemed so vast at Whispering Pines, narrowed to irrelevance. They were simply two people who had found unexpected connection, who saw each other clearly despite external differences. I have something for you too, Naya said, reaching into her pocket. She withdrew the smooth stone he had given her 28 days earlier. But now, carved into its surface with delicate precision, was a single word: dare. Zion's breath caught as he recognized his stone, transformed by her hand. Dare, he repeated, question evident in his voice. I've spent my life choosing truth, Naya explained. The safe option, the known path. She pressed the stone back into his palm, her fingers lingering against his. I'm ready to choose dare instead. Understanding dawned in his eyes. And what does that mean exactly? It means I want to build something real with you, not just a literacy center, though that's a beautiful beginning. Something between us, complicated and inconvenient and absolutely worth every obstacle. The simple declaration hung between them, rain falling more steadily now, neither of them moving to seek shelter. For a moment, Zion simply looked at her with wonder, as if unable to believe what he was hearing. Then he was pulling her close, one hand cradling her face with infinite tenderness, while the other kept the carved stone safe in his pocket. Their kiss held nothing of hesitation or uncertainty, only recognition, homecoming, promise. I've been waiting 28 days, 6 hours, and 23 minutes to do that, he murmured against her lips, his mathematician's precision somehow the most romantic thing she'd ever heard. Worth the calculation? She asked, raindrops catching on her eyelashes. Worth everything, he answered with such certainty that it silenced all her lingering doubts. They walked back toward the bookstore, fingers intertwined, utterly content despite the rain that transformed their clothes to second skins. Tomorrow would arrive with complications, his board expecting quarterly projections, her distributors demanding payment, their different worlds requiring negotiations and compromises neither could yet imagine. The path ahead remained uncharted. But tonight, beneath Charleston's rain-washed sky, they had found something most people search lifetimes for: truth within a dare, certainty within risk, belonging within difference. What had begun as a manipulated experiment had transformed into something Eleanor Blackwood could never have predicted or controlled. Authentic connection that transcended her cynical hypotheses about human behavior. As they reached the bookstore's welcoming lights, Nia paused with her key in the lock, turning to face Zion once more. Truth or dare? She asked, echoing the game that had first connected them. His smile held all the answers she needed. Both, he replied. Always both. Above them, stars emerged as rain clouds began to part, the same stars they had watched from their mountain lake, now witnessing this new beginning. Different latitude, different circumstances, same constellation of possibility, stretching infinite before them. Together they stepped across the threshold, closing the door on separation and opening a chapter neither could have written alone. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not a conclusion, but a promise. Not truth or dare, but truth and dare intertwined, the perfect foundation for whatever story they would write next.